All right, we're recording. Just going to flip this over to desktop number 2 here. All right, so I have some portfolio examples to show you guys and talk about. And then I have some things maybe we can quickly go over in InDesign. I'm going to record this. I'm recording this right now, so you guys can sort of refer back to this if it's helpful at a later time. I know you guys are under the gun with a deadline for tomorrow, so let's see here. So here are some portfolio examples. Some of these are better than others, and we can talk about the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of each one. And maybe I'll start here at the bottom. All right. So one of the things you can notice here, and I'm just sort of previewing this on the Mac side here. One thing you'll notice are these crop marks. And so this is something that you can do if, for instance, you're planning on printing this, and then you have those crop marks to sort of tell you where to trim the pages, right? But you can see I have sort of cover and then the sort of table of contents, right? This is sort of a spread, even though I think it's sort of one off. So this would be a cover, and then this would be the, but if it's meant to be seen electronically, then I guess that makes sense. So as I flip through each spread, you can see I have, basically it looks like an 8.5 by 11 landscape orientation for each page. Very simple, right? One thing you'll notice is that you'll see grids on all of these. Sometimes they're a little more subtle and implied. Other times they're quite literal, like this grid here, right? And so what you can see is that within this grid, you can take all the cells, or you can take, and break it up into 2 columns and 2 rows, right? And you can see that there's a consistency here. So 1 big picture, then 4 small ones, right? Maybe 2 pictures, 2, 3. Again, it's still adhering to the grid, right? But then deciding which columns and rows to sort of eat up with photographs, depending on the situation, right? And then every so often break the rules with a full bleed image, right? When you have one that's special and stretches like that, right? So here we have a full page, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we have a full page, and then half over on the left, and then the right is split up between 2. Right? And so it all comes back to this grid. How many of these rows and columns, depending on what you're displaying and how to do it as elegantly and simply as possible, right? There are a few examples where it breaks down, right? You have some diagrams or some pictures. Again, they're still organized on a grid, right? So you can see these things line up even across from page to page across the spread, right? 2 by 3, and then ultimately the spread is 2 by 6, right? With a little bit of a gutter here. So again, that's one of the things I recommend, is keeping things very simple. Try not to decorate the page. You're placing useful information on the page in useful ways that make it easy to read and to see, and let the work speak for itself. And, so if you're decorating the page, you're just decorating it with useful information, right? And so you can see down here, the consistency is, basically that last grid row, right down at the bottom, the last 1 or 2 grid rows are taken up with text. You have a consistent sort of, what do you call it, title, right? Or sort of heading, and then body text split into 3 columns, right? And then the 3rd column in a sort of blank page, or a page with just graphics, is where you put caption, right? With some labels above. So again, just some simple rules, and then just sticking with them, right? Not enough for 3, or not a lot of text. It's still broken up into 3 columns, right? If it doesn't stretch, then that's blank, right? And so you start to see a sort of cadence here, right? With now, it's kind of interesting. You can see with the text, they went sort of full justify, so left and right justified. It gets a little goofy here, right? With some of the spacing in between words. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'd prefer to sort of what we used to call ragged right, right? So left justify, you can keep the right sort of going there. But oftentimes I think, when the sort of kerning and spacing in between words differs that much, let's say between this and this and this, it sort of looks a little weird, right? So that's where I might, adjust the typeface, adjust the size, and then maybe rethink the sort of full justify if it's getting in the way of being able to sort of read the text, right? There's certain things that you do with, let's say, headings, and there's certain things that you do with body text. Body text is usually all about making it easy to read small text in lines, and then to sort of understand where the next line begins, and to continue to read continuously. And I would actually argue that this portfolio doesn't make that so easy when it comes to the body text. If you ever read a newspaper or a magazine and sort of see those layouts, they're usually done pretty well. Oftentimes body text will be serifed. In other words, the difference between serif text and sans serif text is like the difference between Times New Roman and Arial, right? So the serif, this is sans serif. It doesn't have any of those little, embellishments at the ends of I's and T's, and so it's really nice and clean. But at the same time, serif fonts like Times New Roman, Garamond, and things like that have been sort of found, Book Antiqua, those sort of families of typefaces have been found to be easier to sort of read as body text, right? So, if you have a personal preference, go for it. There's lots of different ways to sort of make your text and typeface sort of read and stand out and or make it easy to read. But suffice to say, you can always, it's all about consistency, right? It's all about consistency. I wouldn't use any really goofy fonts, right? You sort of keep the font simple, but you could go with something serifed or sans serifed in that way, right? So you can see, again, sort of grids of let's say studies, prototypes, study models, planar compositions, whatever these things are, diagrams with axons, you can begin to sort of think about how to arrange these. Sometimes, I'll be honest, right? You do some diagrams and you're like, the diagrams are, they are what they are, right? They look more impressive when they're smaller. You're not looking at all the detail on them, and you start to see a quantity of them, right? As sort of build up. And so you can always, again, sort of think about, what needs to be big, and you want to show a lot of detail in. And you want somebody to sort of spend some time looking at it in depth, versus what do you want them to sort of skip over and just sort of see, how prolific you've been without necessarily, looking and picking at each thing. All right, you'll see here building sections, right? Perspective, some models, some photographs of prototypes, an exploded axon, right? Photos. These are some weird things. I think they're experimenting with extruding plastic and through 3D printing and purposely letting the sort of plies sort of drip and yeah. So this might be drawing and carving with a KUKA robot arm or an ABB robot arm. So you can see that there's a variety of work here, right? Furniture scale, architecture scale, prototype scale, graphic design scale, interior or industrial design scale. Okay, you're looking at breeze walls. Here's these sort of breeze blocks that Erwin Howard used to do. The sort of mid-century aesthetic, right? If you're interested in that stuff, further. All right, so that's one example, right? And again, we can talk about strengths and weaknesses here, but let's look at another one. This is one of my colleagues. He's in landscape. He's in art landscape architecture. Phil Zawaros, you might meet him, this coming year when we're back in the building, right? So here he has a cover, very subdued, really sort of, again, doesn't have to, he doesn't have to do a lot with his type here, his name and position and contact info, because it's not competing with anything else on the screen. Very so simple and clean, right? Just some sort of patterning that he did that's then lightened up, tinted out, and then actually sort of gradients to white, right? A little bit of a CV here. something that resembles a sort of table of contents and intro, right? And then these sorts of things that he did for his research and projects, right? So, here you have a sort of landscape section slash perspective, right? Sort of talking about the natural systems and how they work. There's a sort of stylized section and a set of diagrams, right? Stylized plan showing water flows, slope conditions. Again, all of these talking about the hydrology of a particular place. And that's one of the things he's really interested in, hydrology. Here's another one, sort of talking about prototypes, sort of sticking some custom-made laser cut tools at the end of a CNC router that then can grab pens and start to draw. And then you can start to see watercolor experiments, Sharpie, marker experiments, pencil experiments. Again, a lot of diagrams. This is an exploded sort of axon, right? But of a large, really ridiculously large landscape area, right? You can see some sections. Perspective that's also cut in section. Again, not completely, it's diagrammatic, right? And it's a collage. It's not necessarily all photorealistic, right? See another one here, right? With some silhouettes and some text information, sort of annotating what we're looking at with some metrics, right? So we're talking about, let's say, flow rates for water, how to slow them down, what sorts of contaminants you find in these, and that slowly get filtered in wetlands, things like that, right? So the idea is that, how do we capture stormwater and let nature sort of filter it for us, rather than just sort of letting it sort of flow and capture more contaminants along our streets into a storm drain, channel it down to the lake, and then we have to sort of treat it big time with chemicals, right? So, landscape architecture is always interested in these sort of larger issues. How do we work with nature rather than against it, right? And, a lot of things that we did in the 20th century seem to be working against it, even if we didn't intend that. And so now we're sort of backing up and trying to sort of find new ways to work with nature. And talking about, again, water cycle, water table, the hydrology of a site, how things flow, how they percolate down in, where they can filtrate through the ground, where they can't. How that translates to, let's say parking lot design, right? Where instead of paving it all, maybe you have pervious pavers and other sorts of ground materials that let the water sort of go down and into the ground. Right. So I'll just sort of show this, but again, there's an implied grid here, right? So you'll see lots of examples of this. Text over here, right? Some sort of long drawing or a sequence of small pictures or drawings along the bottom, and then something larger on the top. Sometimes that changes, right? Sometimes it flips so that, what was text on the left-hand side becomes two smaller images and a caption on the right-hand side with the big image, right? So you can begin to see, you can change it up depending on what it is, but it's all organized with a grid, right? So, whether it's on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the spread, right? Suddenly we start to see, again, there's 4 columns, how they're organized. Everything's arranged in a grid. And I think that's really important. One of the first things you'll do, and we'll talk about this in InDesign, is we'll start to establish some guidelines. So we'll just come up with a simple set of rules for margins and gutter in a grid, right? And you don't have to make it very hard. It can be a 2x3 grid or a 3x4 grid, or maybe it's, break it up into halves, and then you can break those up into halves, and then you get quarters, right? Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the easier and simpler it is, the better, right? And part of this is talking about, the sort of white space. Some of these are quite dense with information, and others sort of have a nice, amount of sort of negative space here, right? And I wouldn't be afraid of, some white space and some negative space on your page, right? Going back to this cover, right? Suddenly the information that you do put on here is emphasized, right? If this thing is super dense with lots of things on it, then how do you emphasize, where does the viewer's eye stop, right? And so, the nice thing about this is that you can always sort of try to find a balance between the amount of information on a page and how it reads, and where do you want the viewer's eye to go first, right? And so oftentimes you'll see sort of sparing use of color. And then where you do use color, that's what your eyes are drawn to, right? I mean, I can't help but see the cyan and the reds, right? Same thing here. And then have some sort of consistent color scheme. Maybe that's project by project, right? You can see consistency here. These sort of cyan and sort of burgundy, right? A little bit of green, right? Over here, we start to see, some more natural sort of materials. So we see greens and golds and browns, right? A little bit of blue. Right? So when you have golds and olives and orange, you can also throw in some blue because they're complementary, blue and orange, right? And so you start to see orange and blue. Some golds, orange, golds. Here's a little green and stuff like that, right? Orange and blue. Right? So have you guys talked about color theory at all? I don't think I've talked to you about that. Color theory. No?
Nope.
Yeah, I think is that like the orange is the opposite to blue and like
Yeah, just talking, I mean,
Wheel.
basic color theory, we talk about the color wheel and color schemes. And so maybe I'll pull that up in just a moment, but just give you a sense of what we're seeing here. All right, let's move on. Again, one image, very simple text, table of contents, lots of negative space, right? Don't have to be afraid of negative space. A sort of introductory image with introductory text on the other side, right? You think about these as, this is the left-hand side of a spread, right? So a booklet. This is the right, right? You can see how this moves from left to right. Again, sort of keeping some of that white space. Same thing with the next spread. Right now, the whole spread's turned to black background, for better or worse. Sometimes that can throw people off. I don't really mind, but again, here we have a title, we have some text, we have an introductory set of images. Right on the other side, we have more. We have a full bleed image, right? If you have something that's incredible, this looks different, doesn't it? Then you can say, look, I want this to be full bleed. I want this to be, this image to be the only thing on the page. And that's another way of sort of adding emphasis to something, right? These weren't important enough to go, one page alone, right? In fact, they're a sequence of sort of saying, here's what we started with, here's how the computer sees it, and then here's what it started to do with it, right? Talking about, I think, looking at some sort of deep learning algorithm and doing something weird with a data set of images of architecture and then making something new from them, right? For better or worse, again. Be careful, I'll say. This image is, I think, because of the way the submission portal worked, you had to you can only submit something that was like several megabytes large for the entire document. So this is pixelated and blurry, right? And you have to be careful with that. Couple of graphics I saw yesterday had this problem, and we'll talk about that this afternoon. But I'll help you with those. Again, sort of again, a full bleed image. In this case, the similar sort of way to talk about text, sort of several different columns of text with a large sort of title, but instead of along the bottom, now it's along the top. I guess the sky is a little less busy to try to float text over. Maybe that's why they did that. And again, consistency, I would say, is the key here. And there's some, excuse me, there are some inconsistencies in this one, right? And if you have the time and you can craft each individual page as its own sort of composition without a lot of rules, then wow, that's great. But oftentimes those rules are to help us sort of plug and play, right? So that we don't have to spend hours and hours trying to craft a portfolio, right? So you can see lots of different graphics, trying to decide which graphics are small, and you have this sort of accumulate in a grid here, right? Versus what's what's large and sort of takes up a good part of the page. All right. Let's look at this one. Again, and you'll see this pattern, right? Like simple cover, right? And then suddenly it's like, I know who this portfolio is for. It's Max Kuo, right? Or whoever that is. Again, not afraid of negative space, right? So here you see on the top, right? And I'll go to the next one. But you see a sort of gutter here. You see some text. You see, let's see, what else do we see here? There we go. Looks like we're kind of want this to be the same size as the page. It's weird. Something like that maybe. But then, so full justified, and then right justified, right against this this invisible guide. We have a title, a subtitle, some sort of category, like this is a retail project, right? Talking about program, the time and dates and location, right? So these are plans with black background on a white page. Kind of odd to do that, but you know, not bad. Right? Here we have arranging the shoes in some sort of weird sort of serial pattern, of serial rotating pattern. All right. Okay, so here again, consistency, right? Sort of cleanses your palette. Okay, we just saw sneakers in a boutique shoe store. Now, what's coming next? Bloomer, Sunset Junction Plaza, somewhere in LA area, Silver Lake. Right. Some sort of proposal for, that would be different, wouldn't it? Right. So you can begin to sort of get, again, sort of look. Again, simple, right? I mean, I'm not a big fan of this work necessarily, but you know, a big image. All right, now 2, right? Big image, 2, right? Here I have you could call this a big image, or I could just say, you know, 3 sort of serial plans, right? Again, with lots of site information, like some of you had, right? Complete page, or you know. So again, I would strive for simplicity. Right? Don't get too cute with these. You know, oftentimes the most professional looking portfolios are the cleanest looking, right? In other words, they don't look cluttered. They don't look like they're packed full, right? But they give the work a chance to breathe, right? If I look at this page, what do I notice? I notice the work, the photographs itself, and not, you know, some sort of weird layout scheme or anything like that. Okay. Let's see. All right. Here we have grids, right? So we have something large and then a grid of 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3 by 4 grid. Something large, 3 by 4 grid. Something large, 3 by 4 grid, right? What's interesting is that, you know, a similar grid sort of divides each project and each page, right? So here we have a set of diagrams. Not unlike your precedent studies, but in this case, they're looking at like sort of neighbors in a neighborhood, right? And breaking them down and starting talking about what they're learning from the context around, right? There's an axon, sort of an interesting sort of plan oblique where you turn the plan 45 degrees, then project up as an isometric drawing. Right, again, something large, 3 by 4 grid, but they switch sides this time. Full page of something, I don't know what that is, some sort of process. Right, process sketch on trace paper. Some photographs. Sketches in their sketchbook. Right, some drawings made in Rhino or Revit or, you know, Studio Max and then brought into Illustrator, right? And then some rendered, soft rendered renderings sort of as an underlay to sort of give some tone and three-dimensionality to certain parts, right? Now suddenly between line weights and tone, I know this is important, and this is important. And then I start to look around and I start to see some of the construction geometry and projections back and forth between seeing this view of it, this view of it, and this view of it, right? Don't be afraid of having some dashed lines, just like with your drawings, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Again, the theme here being, you can break the rules with the grid or divide it up into subgrids and then start to selectively say, I want 3 columns or 2 columns or 1 column, depending on what I need, right? But you can see very simply, right, that sort of white background, so these things start to float, right? In a really nice way, on a sort of nice, clean, blank page. That's about as dense of a page as I've seen so far, right? So sort of 2 full images, right? That's a nice page, isn't it? Sort of showing, those are like massing studies that you guys were doing, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Exploded axon. Actually, this is an exploded perspective. It's not an axon. Okay. This is a different scale. Sort of industrial design, furniture, and things like that, right? Again, very simple, right? A and B. So, I have something that can go horizontal at the top, right? Then when I have text down below, I use the first column for title and information, and then the 2 other columns for the body text, right? I can go full bleed, full page. Although, gosh, that's really pixelated, isn't it? Right? And then I could go the opposite direction. So I go 1 large, 2 small, right? Same thing, right? So there was the first one. There's the second one. First project, second project, right? And then variations with the rules inside each project. There's another one, right? Look at that. Look at that. Consistency, right? All of those things are guides. You can make your own sort of template pages and then use one for, let's say, the first page of a project. And you can sort of make these templates, these sort of masters, and then use them, distribute them throughout the portfolio and InDesign. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of quickly sort of thumb through this. Right, let's see. It doesn't matter if we're designing buildings or if we're designing toothbrushes or we're designing iMacs or we're designing websites, right? We all sort of speak a similar language when it comes to design. We all study sort of, proportion. We study things like composition. We study things like balance and colors and things like that. So really quickly, here's one that goes full on with the color. It does it pretty well, actually, but it's very hard to do, right? So this is a former colleague of mine, good friend, right? You can see that he did not shy away from color. He loves color. So even at the title, the cover, and the sort of table of contents, right? Each page is sort of just really overstimulation of the rods and cones in your eyes, right? So here's another project, right? Sort of full bleed shift city, right? Here you can see pinks and peaches and oranges and some tans, right? So those are all sort of on the same side of the color wheel. So that would be an analogous color scheme, right? Again, we continue to see pinks and creams and peach. Right, here we have reds, pinks, and violets. All right, now we're starting to get into blues. We can see the complementaries, blues and oranges, right? Now we have analogous. So we have everything from gold all the way to sort of red, pink. Right? So each spread is highly stylized and very deliberate, almost annoyingly so. And again, it doesn't shy away from color. This is very hard to do. I recommend using color sparingly in your work for a while until you sort of get the hang of things. Okay. Oh, this one seems so simple. It's black and white. So sometimes it's nice to have a respite from overstimulation of color. Right? So let's talk just a little bit about the color wheel, and then I'll move on to one more example or two, and I'll even show you an example from my work. Color wheel. Let's talk a little bit about color in this context. How many of you took an art class in high school or college at some point?
I did.
You did? Good, 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 good. It's very helpful. Very helpful. So if I look at, let's try to find a good color wheel here. This one's not too bad. It's a little overly RGB for my taste, but we'll use it. Why not? Oh, I thought it'd be larger than that. There we go. Okay. So actually, let me back up. Sorry, that's not hopeful, but let me back up. All right, so we have primaries, we have secondaries, we have tertiary colors. Primary colors, anybody want to take a stab at it?
RGB,
Not quite.
red,
So these are the primary colors, right? They're used to, you mix them up in order to make secondary colors. So
Yellow, red, and blue.
red, blue, and yellow. Red, blue, and yellow are the primary colors. The secondaries, green, orange, and violet, are made by mixing the primaries that are adjacent. So if I mix yellow and blue, I get green. These are really terrible values that they used in this color wheel, by the way. That doesn't really look like a true green. And this doesn't look like a very vibrant blue, but you get the idea. Let me, now we've discussed this. So we have the primaries, yellow, blue, red. In between the secondaries, we have orange, which is a mixture of yellow and red, violet, which is a mixture of red and blue, green, which is a mixture of blue and yellow. And then between those, we have the tertiary. So we have yellow, green, green, blue, blue, violet, violet, red, red, orange, yellow, orange, etc. Right. So we can use the color wheel to begin to organize and understand different sort of color schemes, right? So when we say complementary colors, we're talking about color values that are on opposite sides of the color wheel. So for instance, blue and orange I was mentioning, right? So every time you take a picture out of red rock, you get all that really reddish orange iron stone variegation, sandstone out there, and then you get that bright blue Nevada sky, right? You're using color theory without even knowing it. Okay. Let me bring up an example that we can sort of look at when it comes to these things. Well, let's talk about color theory since we have the time. And again, we're keeping it light today because I know you guys are in the back of your minds even right now are thinking about your papers. So let me just find the right, let's see if I can find my presentation on color theory here. It's probably on the Google Drive. Let's just do that. drive.google.com. Starred. Laptop backup. There we go. It's probably in here somewhere. Documents. Teaching. Maybe this one. Color theory lecture. Look at that. It's an InDesign file, really? You gotta be kidding me. Here, let me see if I just have a PDF of this. That's silly. What in the heck was I thinking there? Color theory lecture. Oof. Let me just download this. Sorry about that. That's odd. Well, that's downloading. Getting zipped and downloading. I'm going to search in here really quickly. Certain I have some sort of scale. Loading Google Slides. What's that? Color theory presentation. Ah, here's the PDF. Maybe I'll just download this, try that. Right, so stop. Color theory, right? So some color terms like hue, what we're talking about is the actual color value. So, green is a hue, red is a hue, yellow, orange is a hue. Saturation is the amount of color, right? As differentiated from tints or whites and blacks. So when you shade something, that's when you're mixing black into it to darken it, right? So we start to see in this first color wheel, right, that we get a value like this, and then we can either shade it and get it darker or tint it and get it lighter, right? So that's what shade and tint mean, particularly when you're using Photoshop, right? You can begin to use some of those tools, mixing white into color to lighten it, tone, mixing gray into the color to soften it, monochromatic meaning you only have one value or one hue, one color, right? Polychromatic meaning multiple hues, right? So when we talk about monochromatic schemes versus polychromatic schemes, we're talking about the amount of color in the color scheme being used, right? Primary colors, we just talked about that, red, blue, yellow, right? We use the primary colors, we can mix them together. Red, blue makes violet. To make the secondary colors, blue, yellow makes green, red, yellow makes orange. Tertiaries, those are the ones that sit in between the primary and secondaries. So we get things like red, violet, and we get blue, violet, and yellow, green, and orange, red, and things like that. Okay. Color schemes. No, so here's one way to look at this, right? So we can talk about complementaries, right? Across from each other on the color wheel. Red and green are complementary colors. Blue and orange are complementary colors. Violet and yellow are complementary colors, right? So every time you see a Lakers logo, you're looking at complementary colors, right? Every time you see a Christmas motif with red and green, you're looking at complementary colors. Okay. Split complementary. These are nice because what they do is they give you a bigger range, right? You can have like sort of red and red orange and red violet, right, paired with green, right? Double complementaries, you can have two sets of complementary colors, right? So, two sets of complements, right? Maybe they're on different sides of the color wheel. Analogous means that we're using a set of hues, right? A range of values that are sort of adjacent to each other on the color wheel. So there's where we start to talk about, let's say, a warm color scheme using warm red, orange, yellow, orange, and yellow, or something like that, right? Triad, right? Meaning red, blue, yellow. So in other words, if you make this sort of, if you think about the sort of logo, the sort of Mercedes logo, I guess, but sort of go attaching to, let's say, the primary colors or the secondary colors, right? And you can sort of move that around. You can start to sort of find triadic colors, and then tetrad, right? Sort of meaning complementary, double complementary, but forming a sort of 90-degree angle. So I'm not expecting you to remember all of these terms, but suffice to say, when you're looking at the color scheme, you can look at the color wheel and you can begin to sort of look around at things. You can also look and there's apps that help you with this. Adobe Color is one of them. There's lots of web apps online that you can use to sort of help you sort of, find, depending on the color scheme you want to use, color values that match something that you already are using, right? So you can plug in a hexadecimal value or an RGB or CMYK value, and then give you lots of options, and even start to play around with the color wheel yourself and try to find values to sort of sample, right? So, we can talk about this in the context of art, over time, right? These very, who were these from? I can't even remember the painter, right? But again, we're starting to see complementary color scheme, right? So we see golds, yellows, oranges, and blues, right? Maybe it's actually a split complementary, right? If I think about split complementary, right? I see blue and I see a little bit of red and orange and some yellows, right? So that's kind of a split complementary, isn't it? What's this one? What are the values that we see in here? You guys can participate. What are our colors, our hues? What do we see in here?
We got the red and looks like
Red,
blue.
Reds and
Green.
greens. Yeah, I see a lot of green actually. So complementaries, right? Red and green are complements to each other. They're across each other on the color wheel. If you think about red, orange, and this sort of, aqua, right? We kind of have that too. I think, Brent, you were kind of alluding to, there's some blues in here as well. So the greens go from a sort of olive all the way to a sort of blue-green. And the reds, I would say, go from red to sort of red-orange, right? But again, there's a relationship there that you see a lot, right? We can look at these, in renderings, we can see them in paintings, right? Here we have blues and violets, and we have some yellows and warm earth tones, right? Even going to sort of orange all the way to sort of tan, sort of unsaturated a bit, right? So they're not super vibrant, right? We can see the same things here. We can see some blues and we can see some oranges and some sort of fleshy, peachy colors, right? Sort of orange, right? We see a little bit of green here as well. Right? Here we have analogous, right? We have greens, golds, olives, some oranges and browns, right? Those all sort of sit on one sort of third of the color wheel, right? So instead of looking at opposite ends of the color wheel, here we have some nice warm greens all the way, warmer greens all the way to sort of, orange brown. Monochromatic, right? Everything's grayscale except for what's highlighted here in this sort of pink color, right? So monochromatic color scheme, you're just looking at one sort of value. There's some tints and some shades of it, right? Darker values and lighter values, but it's the same hue over and over again. What about this one? They're not always cut and dry here, but what do you see here?
I see reds and greens.
Yeah, I see some splashes of red, right? I see some other sort of, values that they're barely have some color to them, but they're on that sort of side of red. And I see some greens, right? So
There's some blues too.
yeah, there's some splashes of blues. Let's think about that for a moment. Let's go back to the color wheel. Right, so we had some reds, we had some blues, and we had some of these, right? It's almost a triad, right? We had sort of yellow tan, red tan, but not saturated at all. We had some unsaturated red, and then we had some vibrant red, and we had some vibrant blues in there. Right, so we had some subdued blues, some vibrant blues, some subdued reds, some vibrant reds. Then we had some yellows and tans, right? We have some greens, and sometimes it's not so cut and dry. What do we have here? Watercolor over a sketch, quick sketch in the sketchbook.
Blues and oranges.
Blues and oranges, right? So complementaries. More or less a monochromatic scheme, right? We have, sort of value of that sort of blue-green. Sometimes it gets darker, sometimes brighter. It's a little more on the blue side in some places, but very subdued, but there's a little bit of blue to this, and there's a little bit of orange to this. Okay. Again, oftentimes it's not about using really super vibrant colors. So I like to show these examples because you can start to, look at and sort of train yourself to sort of see the color. There's some blues and violets in this what looks like a sort of grayish, right? You can sort of see some of those violets coming out here. You can see some of the blues in places, some navies. What do we have here? Reds, greens, some golds and some oranges, right? So kind of a split complementary where we have green on one side, and we have some values of red and around red on the other, right? I'll go through I'll sort of speed through this. I don't want to spend the whole time on this. More or less monochromatic with a few splashes with some red values and some blue values here and there. You can see some blue in the sky, right? But then you start to see this sort of tan. Tan and blues look nice together in a lot of different combinations because tan and brown are kind of like tinted or sorry, sometimes tinted, sometimes shaded orange, right? And so you get these sort of relationships where you start to understand there's a continuum of colors. browns in the color wheel sort of on that sort of red and orange side. But you just sort of take out some of the color, desaturate, and then start to darken or lighten the way you need to. So tans and greens can look good together. Tans and browns can look good, or tans and blues can look good together. More or less monochromatic or triadic, or sorry, not triadic, but analogous, right? So we're seeing a lot of blues, some blue violets, right? You know, right there in the same spot of the color wheel. This is deceptively simple. You start to see some orange and some green first, then you start to look and go, oh, there's some violet and some blue and some pink and some red in here, right? In some places. It's definitely polychromatic. What I would call this is I have red and green, I have blues and oranges. You might call this a sort of double complementary, right? Or maybe even a triple complementary, right? I start to see some yellows and some violets in places as well, right? In fact, this is yellow and violet right here together. I see some violets. Analogous, right? We go from sort of red with some orange values in it to all the way to red with some violet values in it. So orange, red, 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 violet, right? All of those three are sort of adjacent on the color wheel. Complementaries, right? Sort of blue and violet, yellow and orange. Same thing, right? Here we go. Famous paintings, right? So Cafe Terrace, I forget, what the exact name is, by Van Gogh, right? We see what? Blues and yellows, right? Blues and oranges and golds and some violets, right? So we begin to understand those complementary relationships. Violet and yellow. I defy you, like you're gonna watch TV, like if you have the Olympics on in the background while you're working or doing stuff. Like you'll start to see advertisements and you'll start to see these things. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's one more sort of layer of like how to see our built environment, right? And our representation and paintings and art and advertisements and anything sort of graphically composed, right? Here we have two dominant colors, so the sort of washed out, but sort of actually warmer blue, and then we have some of the washed out orange up here, right? Sort of tan. Complementaries, right? Red and green, and here we have monochromatic, sort of values between white and black. All the grays, sort of continuum. Complementaries, right? Analogous, right? We have greens, golds, oranges, right? So you think about that color part of the color wheel where we have yellow, orange to yellow to green, right? Yellow and in the secondaries that yellow can create with red and with blue, right? Then we have a lot of those values in here. We start to see some oranges, we start to see golds, we start to see yellows, olives, and then finally some greens. We have a little bit of blue up here, right? Not very dominant compared to, all of this sort of, just the part of the sky, right? It's an interesting photograph, actually. Or set of photographs composed together and stitched. All right, so what about this one? Getting a little more complex here. Look, what are the values we see? We see some violets, some reds and some oranges and some golds, some yellows. We see like a sort of blue-green. Yeah, teal, blue-green, aqua. So thinking back to that color wheel, what kinds of things do we see? Greens and reds. We see violets and yellows and oranges, right? So we start to see sort of a double complement here, right? Green, red, and then gold, violet. right? Artists have made great use of color theory, right? And sort of studying this, right? You guys probably talked a little bit about the Bauhaus when you were talking about, what led up to modernism in the 20th century, right? You guys talked about the Bauhaus. And so one
We
of the
did, yeah.
things, yeah, so one of the things like Vasily and Kandinsky and some of the others artists there were really who was the other one, Clay and some of the other painters there were really did a lot of studies on color theory and what happens when you put two colors together. This is Andy Warhol again with these sort of multicolored or sort of polychrome prints, right? Sort of taking a photograph and then deconstructing it as a sort of set of values of colors that are put together. And keep going, as you keep going, right? We can greens, violets, oranges, some yellows. What would that be? Could be a split complementary, right? So you have violet on one side and yellow on the other, and then adjacent you have some oranges and some greens, right? So that's one way of looking at it. What's this one? What are the three colors we have in here?
Yellows, some reds, some blues.
And their significance of having those three together, they are what kind of colors? They're primary colors, right? So this is a triadic scheme, right? We sort of, in this case, using the primaries. Same thing, right? Red, yellow, blue. Red, yellow, blue. Red, yellow, blue, right? So those triadics, you see them all over the place, right? Maybe you didn't notice. They're there, right? And I defy you to not notice them from now on, right? In works of art, advertising, branding. Here's the De Stijl, Mondrian, the precursor to the Schroeder house, right? You probably talked about a little bit in history. Right? Okay, so I just wanted to sort of touch base on color theory. It's something that we hadn't talked about, but I think it's really important to talk about it at some point in your design education. And I don't know if we didn't do it now, I don't know when you would get it, right? So now you can impress your studio instructor, David, who's also an accomplished artist with some color theory. And just sort of drop it on him and you'll be like, wait, what? All right, so anyway. All right, you guys ready to make fun of my portfolio? One of them, right? Again, try to keep it simple. These are meant to be in a spread. So there's the left side, right side. There's a grid there. Left side, or sorry, this is just a spread, talking about again.
Were those all hand-drawn sketches?
Yeah. Yeah, these are graphite on paper. Yeah, they just take time. Left side, right side. So a little busier, but when you have not so much space and a page limit, you have to make do. Right? Left side, right side. Or sorry, this is left side and right side, actually. All right, so again, just keeping it simple. All right, so another section, left side, these are graphite too. Right side, left side, right side, left side, right side. Maybe I'm out of order, I don't know. Okay, so you get the idea. It's really about sort of conforming to a grid and then making sure that you have enough space so that the work doesn't look like it's really cramped, right? And making sure you pick a font size and type that doesn't really interfere with your understanding of reading it. It's not too big, can't be too small. But oftentimes I see people erring on the side of making text too large. So you can always look at good magazines and good books and sort of look and see how, compare sizes with the fonts. You'd be surprised. You don't necessarily, the biggest mistake I see is I see people using like size 16 font. It's like, don't do that. 10, 8, 9, maybe 11, right? You know, and then gives with, you know, maybe with other things you could do different, right? So now I've taught all over this school, second year, third year. Grad. Now there's a floor plan. Yeah, look at that. So, and then, you know, again, research, again, looking at, you know, grid, how it sort of breaks up text and images, right? So left hand, right hand side, a spread, left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Okay. So I'll just open up InDesign and you guys can sort of see the interface. And the interface is strikingly similar to Illustrator and Photoshop, no doubt, because it's Adobe. But I just wanted to sort of briefly, just quickly immerse you in InDesign, and just so you don't feel like, oh gosh, on Tuesday when we talk about this more and start doing this, going through the motions and following along, that you don't feel completely lost here. So on the left-hand side, we have a toolbar. We have some cursors, we have some text, we can draw, we can cut, modify, scale, and rotate, and things like that. So very much like what you're used to with all the other softwares that we've been working on, Rhino, Photoshop, Illustrator, right? And much like Photoshop and Illustrator, right? We have the color palette over here. Much like Illustrator, we have a fill and a stroke, right? Okay. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have a set of boxes with settings. And again, along the top, we do too, right? So these boxes can be pulled over. We have things like layers. We have things like stroke for line weight. We have things like colors, right? Where we can start to assign both the outline or the stroke, and then also the fill or the inside of a shape. Right? Let's see, text and character. So we can have, you know, the typical things that we would have in Microsoft Word, for instance, right? Like what font are we going to use? Is it regular or bold or italic or underlined, right? What size? We can actually adjust a lot of things here. The line spacing, we can adjust the kerning, we can adjust the leading, we can adjust a number of things here, and then also how things wrap around graphics, and then also, you know, left justified, full justified, center justified, right? You know, what kind of margins and things we want. So there's more settings here than you'll probably want to use for a while, but they're there. They are there. There we go. There's lots of things like we can align things like along their left edges, or you know, evenly distribute the centers. You know, if you have a bunch of pictures and we just want to sort of space them out evenly, etc. Right. So a lot of these tools you'll find also in Illustrator. There's a couple that you won't find in Illustrator. Right, so one is this pages box. This is really handy because this InDesign is made to make books, right? That's what it does. Publications, multi-page publications. And so what you can see is that I have my pages here, right? I can go through them, and you know, I can have 500 of them if I need them, right? Along with that, I can also make master pages, right? These sort of templates I can use for, let's say, a cover versus a table of contents versus a title page versus a page with graphics versus a page with only text or something like that, right? So in the master, right, I can do something like this. Here, watch. I'll add a couple of pages here, right? And in the master, what I'll do is I'll click and drag from the ruler and start to make some guides here. Let's say in 2-inch increments or something like that. I'm not being too careful here. I should be, but I'm not. Let's see. So I'll do it here at 8 or whatever. Okay. Now you can see. Let's see. I'll drag this on. Drag this on this one. All right, here we go. Here's the 2 new ones that I made, right? You can see that all the changes I made the master now happen across all the ones I applied the master to as a template, right? And I can't accidentally drag these things. And so what we'll do is we'll start to go into these masters and we'll talk about these things. We'll start to actually lay out a simple grid, right? And then we'll apply those, and those will become our template. And then we'll start to plug things in. We'll start to make some rules, right? So we can make things like, you know, a sort of sample sort of title or heading, right? And then some sample body text. And we can make those into text styles that then we can apply later on. So, you know, it's interesting. I can actually like take a Word document with text that's already been edited. I've already done spell check and grammar check, right? And I can place a Word document into InDesign just like I would place an image. And then what I can do is I can have it sort of wrap from this text block to the next text block, right? And then I can sort of say, okay, I have this character style or this paragraph style where turns everything to Arial size 8, left justified, with a certain line spacing, right? And I can just eyedropper that to the text, right? Just like I would in Photoshop with an image, okay? And so that's what we'll work on specifics on next week, all right? And the morning classes. So we'll develop our own template that you can plug your work into, okay? And again, they'll be simple. You know, here's where you can start to, you know, again, drag and drop or apply these things. And again, I can just select these and copy and paste them down, but I'm not sure why some of these are different than the others. That's weird, right? But again, just like with Illustrator, I can go to File and Place, and I can place all kinds of graphics, right? Illustrator graphics, vector graphics from Illustrator, PDFs, JPEGs, or PSDs from Photoshop, right? I can place Word documents from Microsoft Word. And so let's see here. If I did, I have some examples here I could plop in. Let's see here. Hey, look at these. These funny, by the way. These are out of foam core, but look at these planar compositions using the same rules that you guys did virtually. Interesting. All right. Yeah, I'll be the first to admit, sometimes I recycle my assignments. It is what it is. I do what I have to do. Sorry. I don't know why. Oh boy. Let's see here. So yeah. Oh, here we go. Light materials. I'll just drag and drop this bad boy in here, right? So here's an example of a design build project I was doing with students once. Looking at the underside of this sort of park structure, right? Again, I can try to make it conform to the grid, right? Now, if I look at this side of the photograph isn't so nice, like it's kind of boring. And I really want to fill out this part of the grid. So maybe I size this to actually conform to the grid, since maybe it's a heading image. And then using my other cursor, I can just crop the image down so it conforms, right? Maybe if I need to shift that image over, I can inside the crop. And so it's just that. And what you'll find in InDesign that's also interesting is that, let's say I dropped an image here or a Word document here or there, right? If I go to the links, it'll show me that image. It'll also tell me that it's actually linked up. So my InDesign file doesn't necessarily get incredibly large when I start to drop incredibly large images in it, right? In fact, it's meant to be light, because what it does is it doesn't embed the images inside the InDesign file. It remembers the link or the path to it on your hard drive, right? And so what you begin to do is you organize your images where you want them to be and where you'll keep them, right? And you name them what you need to name them. And then when you start to import them in InDesign, InDesign remembers where they're sitting on your hard drive, okay? So that's something else to remember here. You start to, as you start to put images in, photographs in, any kind of raster graphics or Illustrator graphics, vector graphics, or anything that sort of gets linked in here, it's going to try to remember that. And if you move it afterwards, let's say one of these assets, these images, right? When you open up the InDesign file, it's going to go, I can't find it. Where did you put it, right? And so once you start to get a hang of this, you can actually package these up, and it takes a copy of all of these images and puts them in a little links folder for you, and starts stuff like that to sort of keep everything in the same place. So again, we'll go through those specifics in next week, right? At least the important parts. But suffice to say, like, let's say I, just using an example image here, I have a grid, right? And let's say, I have a full page image versus, sort of header image with a title and some explanatory text or something like that. This is called, I call it InDesign Latin. It's like placeholder text that you can actually import in here. So you can fill this up with a text block with basically what I call InDesign gibberish, Latin or something. And just so you can start to, you have just some random sample text to begin to sort of format and get it just right. So estrum voluptate, qui delest, I don't know what any of that means, or if it means anything at all, actually, probably doesn't. But all right. So again, we'll talk about all this stuff. But this is InDesign, and it's made specifically for publications. And so, what you'll find is that, sure, you're going to have a resume/CV, right, when you're looking for a job or applying to other schools or anything like that, right? But your portfolio is what shows your work, right? It shows how well you can design. It shows how you think. It shows your attention to detail, right? It shows everything. It really talks about your design skills, both showing previous design projects, but also it in itself is a design project, right? And so that's why I recommend, again, to think about modules, ordering systems, the grid, right? Keeping things simple, elegant, clean. Make it so that you have something that you can continually plug your work into. And you don't have to keep reinventing it. Okay. So anyway, that's my spiel for today. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop.